Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's Last Post ceremony, which today commemorates the 75th anniversary of the Australian Government approving overseas deployment for members of the Australian Women's Army Service. My name is Troy Clayton, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Air Force is Squadron Leader Lee Stanway. In August 1941, the Australian War Cabinet approved the formation of the Australian Army Women's Service. Later changing its name to the Australian Women's Army Service, it recruited women between the ages of 18 and 45 and served in roles as diverse as administration, logistics, driving, vehicle maintenance, catering, signals and intelligence, releasing men from those duties so they could join the fighting roles. From 1941 until the middle of 1947, more than 24,000 women enlisted for service with the Australian Women's Army Service, were paid wages equal to 2/3 of those of their male equivalents. Despite requests to allow the AWAS to serve overseas, it was prevented from doing so. Several members served in the British Borneo Civil Affairs Unit, but they had to be left behind when the unit deployed overseas in preparation for the liberation of Borneo in 1945. On the 15th of November 1944, the Australian government relented and approved sending the AWAS overseas. A detachment was raised for service in New Guinea, and the AWAS became the only non-medical women's service to send personnel overseas during the war. Colonel Sybil Irving selected a group from thousands of applicants eager to serve overseas. The women were kitted out for the tropics, lectured on what to expect, inoculated against tropical diseases, started on anti-malaria medications, and given extra physical training. The main contingent of 342 left on the MV Duntroon on the 3rd of May 1945. One day after landing in Lae, news came through of the Allied victory in Europe. A total of 385 women served in Lae under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Margaret Spencer. Post-war planning determined that there was no need for a women's service in the Army, and the AWAS was disbanded in June 1947. But the AWAS had already formed an important stepping stone on the road to equality in the Australian Defence Force. Before the formation of the AWAS, the only women accepted by the Army were those working in medical services. Enlistment for the Women's Royal Australian Army Corps would begin in 1951, and by the late 1970s, female soldiers began to be integrated into the Army. Today, we remember the Australian Women's Army Service. We pay our respects to the men and women commemorated here on the Roll of Honour, and to the survivors who returned home. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that love and support them. We also acknowledge the members of the RSL Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria, and RSL Queensland who are watching this ceremony broadcast across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by visitors to the memorial. Australia's Federation Guard is the tri-service ceremonial unit of the Australian Defence Force. They provide a ceremonial presence at civil and military events and during visits to Australia by foreign dignitaries. The Guard will now dismount the catapult party from the tomb of the unknown Australian soldier. If you're able, please stand and join in singing the national anthem.
Catapult party, attention! Catapult party, present arms!
Australians, oh, let us rejoice, for we are young and free. We've golden soil and wealth for toil. Our home is earth by sea. Our land abounds in nature's gifts of beauty rich and rare. In history's page let every state advance Australia fair. In joyful strains then let us sing, advance Australia fair.
Catapult party, shoulder arms! Catapult party, order arms!
Thank you. If you're able, please be seated. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn their loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we'll read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and operations for more than a century. But first we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection.
Today we remember and pay tribute to Corporal Gladys Amelia Gordon. Gladys Gordon was born on the 18th of March 1921 in Ararat, Victoria, to parents Robert and Lillian Gordon. One of 3 children, she grew up in Ararat and attended the local schools. Her parents ran a local nursery known as Rosalie, and by the time the Second World War began, Gladys was working as a florist. She also worked for longtime family friend and well-known retailer of men's clothing, Mr. W.J. Forster, mainly during the busy lead-up to Christmas. Gladys Gordon enlisted for the service in the Army on the 29th of December 1942, joining the Australian Women's Army Service. Her letters of reference provided by family friends and her local parish minister painted a picture of a bright, outgoing young lady who was responsible, hardworking, and eminently trustworthy. The Australian Women's Army Service had been raised in October 1941, and by 1947, when the AWAS was disbanded, some 24,000 women had served in a wide variety of roles. Gordon was sent to number 4 AWAS training depot for her initial training, and she was posted to the 2nd Signals Training Battalion at Ivanhoe in late January 1943. After this, she was posted to number 1 Company, Fortress Signals, in Sydney in mid-March. She was one of 3,600 women who would serve in the Australian Corps of Signals during the Second World War. Gordon remained in Sydney for the next 2 years, although she did travel back to Victoria to visit her family when leave allowed. By December 1944, she was promoted to corporal. Gordon was posted back to Victoria in early April 1945, initially to land headquarters in Melbourne, but on the 26th of April, she was posted to the Army's Military History section. A little over a week later, the war in Europe came to an end when Germany surrendered to the Allies. It would be a further 3 months until Japan ceased fighting following the destruction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki by atomic bombs in early August. Gordon would almost certainly have been part of the celebrations in Melbourne on the 15th of August, when the news of the Japanese surrender was announced. Melburnians, who had begun their celebrations a week before the announcement, flooded the streets of the city for a day of exuberant celebrations. The next day, Victory in Pacific Day, was a much calmer affair, with some 200,000 people attending a ceremony at the Shrine of Remembrance. On the 25th of August, 30,000 servicemen and women and defence workers marched through the city in a victory parade. On the 14th of October, while on leave, Gordon was involved in a 2-vehicle collision in the suburb of Nunawading. She was severely injured and transported to the 115th Military Hospital in Heidelberg. Doctors suspected that she had suffered a fracture at the base of her skull and severe damage to and hemorrhage to the brain. At 2 a.m. on the 15th of October, Gladys Gordon died. She was laid to rest in Springvale War Cemetery the next day. She was 24 years old. The investigation into her death, held the following month, concluded that she had not been at fault, but this would have provided little comfort for her grieving family. Her name is listed on the Roll of Honour on my left, among almost 40,000 Australians who died while serving in the Second World War. A photograph of her headstone is displayed today beside the pool of reflection. This is but one of the many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Corporal Gladys Amelia Gordon, who gave her life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the reading of the Ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them.
We'll remember them.
Catafalque Party, present arms. Catafalque Party, shoulder arms.
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget.
Catafalque Party, inwards turn. Catafalque Party, quick march.
We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Poziere or in the low scrubber Gallipoli with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes the last post ceremony. We'd like to thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial. Wish you all a very good evening. Thank you.